The snow began to fall over the blackthorn woods on the night Ilara was cast out of the only home she had ever known. She stood at the edge of the packlands with a torn cloak wrapped around her shoulders and a newborn pup pressed against her chest. Behind her, the gates of the Ashvale pack closed with a heavy, final sound. No one came to say goodbye. No one dared. Ilara had been an Omega, the lowest rank in the pack, unmated and unclaimed. When the elders discovered she was carrying a child, whispers spread through the pack like wildfire. She refused to name the father, and that silence was enough to seal her fate. The Alpha declared her a disgrace and ordered her exile before the child was even born. She walked into the forest alone, her hands trembling, her heart breaking, but her spirit refusing to bend. She gave birth alone, in an abandoned hunting cabin deep in the woods, with only the sound of wind and her own breathing to guide her through the pain. When she held her son for the first time, she noticed something strange. His eyes, though newborn, seemed to shimmer gold in the firelight. She told herself it was a trick of the light. She did not yet understand how right and how wrong that thought would be. She named him Kale. For the first year, survival was the only thing that mattered. Ilara learned to hunt small game, to find edible roots beneath the snow, to sew clothing from old fabric she traded for at the edge of a nearby village. She was careful never to reveal where she came from. Wolves like her were feared in places like this, and an exiled Omega, with a child of unknown parentage, would only invite more danger. The villagers came to know her as a quiet woman who sold herbal remedies and asked no questions. She built a small reputation as a healer, someone who could ease a fever or mend a wound without judgment. It was enough to keep food on the table and a roof over her son's head. It was not enough to erase the ache she carried in her chest, the one that grew heavier every time she looked into Kale's golden eyes and remembered the man who had given them to him. She never spoke his name, not even to herself. 3 years earlier, during the Blood Moon Accord, packs from across the northern territories had gathered to renew an old peace treaty. Ilara had been sent as part of a small group of servants from Ashvale, invisible by design, meant to pour wine and clear plates, and disappear into the background of history. She had not expected to be seen. She certainly had not expected the Alpha King himself, Darius Voss of the Frostmark throne, to look at her as though she were the only person in the room. Their meeting had been brief, a conversation in a quiet hallway after the feast had ended. A shared laugh over something so small she could no longer remember what it was. A single night that changed the course of her life forever. She had left before dawn, before anyone could see her leave his chambers, and she had told herself it meant nothing. Kings did not remember servants. Alphas did not choose Omegas from rival packs, especially not ones already promised to another in marriage for the sake of peace. She had buried that night so deep inside herself that even her own memories felt like someone else's dream. But dreams do not disappear simply because we wish them to. They grow. They wait. And sometimes, they come looking for us. Kale grew faster than any normal child. By the time he was 2, he stood as tall as children twice his age. His hair had come in silver, pale as moonlight, and his temper could shift in an instant from gentle laughter to a low, involuntary growl that startled even his mother. Ilara taught him from the earliest age to control himself, to hide his eyes when they changed color, to never let anyone outside their small cabin see what he truly was. She told him it was a game. In her heart, she knew it was survival. She often wondered if she was protecting him from the world, or protecting herself from the truth of who his father was. Both, she decided. Both had to be true. Life in the cabin at the edge of the Whisperwood was quiet, but it was not without warmth. Ilara sang to Kale at night. She taught him to read using old books traded from a passing merchant. She watched him grow into a curious, kind-hearted boy who asked endless questions about the stars, about wolves, about why his mother sometimes cried when she thought he was asleep. She always told him the same thing. Someday, she would explain everything. Someday, when he was old enough to understand. She did not know that someday was closer than she thought. It started with small signs, easy to dismiss at first. A raven perched on the fence outside the cabin for 3 mornings in a row, watching the house with an unsettling stillness. Ilara caught the scent of unfamiliar wolves near the tree line one evening, while gathering firewood, gone before she could see their faces, but their tracks pressed deep and confident into the snow, the mark of trained scouts rather than wild strays. She told herself it was nothing. Wolves passed through these woods sometimes. It did not mean anyone was looking for her. Then the letter arrived. It came sealed with a crescent moon pressed into dark wax. A mark she recognized instantly, even after 3 years. The seal of Frostmark. Her hands shook as she held it, and before she could stop herself, she threw it into the fire, watching the wax bubble and the parchment curl into ash. Whatever message it carried, she was not ready to know it. She told herself the past belonged in the past, that reopening it would only bring danger to the small, safe life she had built for her son. But the past, it seemed, was not finished with her. A second letter came 2 weeks later, delivered not by raven, but by hand. Ilara opened the door to find a stranger standing on her porch, a young wolf dressed in the deep blue and silver of the Frostmark court. He said only one sentence before turning to leave. "The king is coming himself. There is no more hiding." She did not sleep that night. She sat by the fire with Kale curled beside her, watching the flames, trying to imagine every possible outcome, and finding herself terrified by all of them. Would he be angry that she had hidden his son from him? Would he see Kale as a mistake, an inconvenient truth from a night better forgotten? Or worse, would he take Kale from her, use his power as king, to claim the child, and cast her aside as nothing more than the Omega who had once shared his bed? She had no answers. She only had fear, and the quiet, aching hope she had spent 3 years trying to smother. He arrived on a morning thick with frost, the kind of cold that turned breath into fog, and silence into something you could almost touch. Ilara heard the horses before she saw them, and by the time she opened the cabin door, Darius Voss was already standing at the edge of her small garden, flanked by 2 guards who kept a respectful distance. He looked older than she remembered, harder around the jaw, more tired around the eyes, but unmistakably him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The wind moved between them, carrying 3 years of silence. Then his gaze shifted past her, to the doorway, where a small boy stood barefoot despite the cold, his silver hair catching the weak morning light, his golden eyes wide and unblinking. Darius went very still. He did not need to ask whose child this was. The truth stood in front of him, small and trembling, one hand gripping the fabric of his mother's skirt. Ilara watched the realization move across his face, watched 3 years of unanswered questions settle into something that looked almost like grief. "How long?" he finally asked, his voice quiet but heavy with something she could not name. "Were you going to let me not know?" Ilara did not answer right away. There was no answer that would make the truth easier to hear. She had made her choice the night she left the Accord without saying goodbye, and she had lived with the consequences of that choice every day since. She was not ashamed of protecting her son. She was only afraid of what came next. "I did what I thought was right," she finally said. "You were promised to someone else. I was exiled for a child no one believed could exist. What was I supposed to do? Walk into your court and hand you a scandal?" Darius did not answer immediately. Instead, he knelt down in the snow until he was level with Kale, who watched him with cautious curiosity rather than fear. For a long moment, the King of Frostmark said nothing at all. He simply looked at his son, memorizing a face he had missed 3 years of birthdays, 3 years of first words and first steps, 3 years he could never get back. "I am not angry at you," he said finally, rising to his feet and turning back to Ilara. "I am angry at the world that made you believe you had to disappear, but that ends today." He told her what she had not dared to hope for. The betrothal that had once bound him to a rival pack had been broken over a year ago, dissolved when the alliance it was meant to protect collapsed under betrayal from within. He had been free for over a year, and in that time he had searched. Quietly at first, through trusted scouts sent to every territory bordering Frostmark. Then more openly, when whispers began to reach him of an Omega healer living at the edge of the Whisperwood, a woman with silver-haired child and eyes like winter moonlight. "I searched for you," he said, "because I never forgot that night. Because leaving felt wrong the moment you were gone, And I spent 3 years wondering if I had imagined the way you looked at me. And now I find out, I did not imagine anything. I find out, I have a son I never knew existed." Ilara felt something inside her chest crack open, 3 years of guarded walls beginning to crumble. She had spent so long believing her exile was permanent, that the life she had built in hiding was the only life available to her. She had never allowed herself to imagine a different ending. "Your exile was never about shame," Darius continued. "It was about protecting a secret too dangerous for you to carry alone. But you do not have to carry it alone anymore. Not you, and not him." He extended his hand, not as a king demanding obedience, but as a man asking for a second chance. There was no ceremony, no crown placed on her head, no grand declaration before a watching court. Just a quiet morning, a small cabin, and a hand reaching out across 3 years of silence. "Come home," he said, "both of you. Not as a secret I have to protect, as my family, in front of anyone who dares to question it." Kale looked up at his mother, uncertain, sensing the weight of the moment even if he did not fully understand it. Ilara looked down at her son, then back at the man standing before her, the man she had spent 3 winters trying to forget, and had never quite managed to. She thought of every night she had cried quietly by the fire, every question Kale had asked about his father that she had not known how to answer, every fear she had carried alone because there had been no one else to carry it with her. She thought of the word someday, the promise she had made to her son that she would explain everything when he was old enough to understand. Perhaps someday had finally arrived. She reached out and took his hand. Behind them, the small cabin that had sheltered her shame and her survival for 3 long years stood quiet in the falling snow, its windows dark, its purpose finally complete. Ahead of them, the road toward Frostmark stretched wide and open, no longer a path leading away from everything she had lost, but one leading toward everything she had once believed was impossible to have. Kale took his father's hand with the other, standing between 2 people who had spent years apart, but were now, finally, together. As they walked away from the cabin, Ilara felt the weight of exile lift from her shoulders, for the first time since that cold night 3 years ago. She was no longer the Omega who had been cast out with nothing. She was a mother, a healer, and soon, a queen, walking home with her son at her side, and a king who had never stopped looking for her. The wind quieted as they disappeared into the trees, and the woods that had once been her only shelter fell silent, holding on to her story, the way old forests hold on to everything they have witnessed. Somewhere beyond the frost and the pines, a new chapter was beginning, one written not in exile, but in return.